Well, good morning, everybody. Dr. Patmos again. It is Sunday morning, May 25th, and Dr. Robert Malone is at it again. I love reading his Substack. I don't pay to subscribe to it, but I do read his Substack because it's a great source of getting a pulse on or getting your finger on the pulse of what's going on in the world of delusional thinking. And this is another one of his more recent delusions. You know, we've been told now for 20 years from Dr. Andrew Wakefield that vaccines cause autism, and Robert F. Kennedy has embraced that and said that vaccines cause autism, and Aaron Siri has made millions of dollars suing because vaccines cause autism, and most people in the United States now believe that vaccines cause autism, so they are uh, refusing to vaccinate their children, and this there's an entire industry now around what's about around autism. There's a widespread belief that there's been an epidemic of autism, that the diagnosis of autism has soared dramatically in the last 50 years, all because of vaccines. Despite the fact that every time this has been investigated, and it's been investigated thoroughly in major, well done studies, there's no link between vaccines and autism. People have, I mean, when this first came out, legitimate scientists were really concerned and said, maybe we should, maybe there's something to this. And they tried, they looked, they did study after study after study, huge international studies, cannot find any link between autism and vaccination. As you may know, Dr. Wakefield, ultimately his article, the one that started this all, was retracted from the Lancet after it was found that it was a fraudulent paper. Basically, the data was contrived and people weren't given proper informed consent. And it was really a very small study that was tweaked, twisted, torqued into a statistical thing that Wakefield using. It was such a bad study that it was retracted. He was actually charged with fraud for this and lost his license to be a doctor in the UK and basically was expelled from the scientific and medical community in the United Kingdom over this. He came to the United States, and here he's been for 30 years now promoting this notion that vaccines cause autism. And um, Kennedy has certainly absorbed that, and it's been very well covered in the media. And now, probably half the country or more believes that vaccines are a cause of autism. But that isn't enough. Kennedy recently came out and said, no, it's acetaminophen that is the cause of autism. And Dr. Donald Trump echoed that at a press conference and told pregnant American women, stop taking Tylenol because it causes autism, which it doesn't. Well, that further research on that kind of threw that out the window, but it didn't stop Kennedy and Trump from planting that seed of doubt in the minds of Americans and planting a seed of tremendous guilt on parents who have children who have been diagnosed with autism, that they're the cause, they're the problem. It was the medication they took, the Tylenol they took during pregnancy that caused the autism. Well, it's not Tylenol. That's been proven. So, what's the latest now? Well, if you want the latest on delusional thinking, you just have to go to Dr. Malone's website, and there is a fantastic article that he wrote where he talks all about sterol synthesis, and he cites a terrible study that found an association between mothers who took a whole variety of medications in large. It's a retrospective study, and they asked women who were pregnant and had children with autism what medications they took when they were pregnant. And there's a laundry list of medications. I mean, maybe, I don't know, 30 or 40 medications. And the article purports to say that these mothers of these autistic children had greater exposure to these certain medications during pregnancy. And it implies that there's a causation. Well, you can't do that from this study. And there's all kinds of the study is so structurally badly designed. It's full of confounding errors. But Malone took it and ran with it. And he's good at that. You know, if Malone were a baseball player, he would be in Cooperstown in the Hall of Fame for holding the record for taking a single and turning it into a double or a triple. Nobody can stretch a single further than Dr. Malone. Well, he took this article and stretched it, came up with an entire theory behind it. And his theory is that all of these drugs that these mothers were taking that allegedly were associated with their child's risk of autism all had something to do with sterol metabolism. Sterol is a fatty substance. It's part of cholesterol and it's part of the cell membrane, in all of our cells. But it's very important, obviously, for cell membrane function. And cell membrane function is important everywhere in the body, especially in the brain. So his latest theory, that for which there's no evidence, is that these drugs that interfere with sterol synthesis are actually the cause of autism. So Dr. Malone has now come up with a new theory on what causes autism, and it's taking these medications during pregnancy. And he wrote this article in early April, just in time, ironically, for a conference that was held in late April in San Diego on the latest research in autism, which he's a speaker. So this is great. You write this article, you can boost attendance to the conference. He obviously gets paid to fly there, his hotels paid for, meals are covered, he gets honorarium. So this is how you make a living, is selling the latest theory on autism. Well, I did a deep dive analysis on exactly what's wrong with his theory, and looking at the paper that he cited. And there's all sorts of bottom line is that it's a really poorly done study. It doesn't account for confounding issues, and it takes this broad association. He turns it into causation. And the reality is, it's a reasonable question to ask. Could certain medications taken in pregnancy interfere with sterol metabolism and produce brain injury in children? It's certainly a reasonable theory to ask, and it's worth doing further investigation of it. But it is not valid to the point where you could take it and present it to a conference to the public and say that you have discovered a new cause for autism. Actually, the latest and most interesting research around autism was published recently in the New England Journal of Medicine, and it's really an embarrassing, eye-opening study. The New England Journal recently had an article that showed that much of the quote epidemic of autism is actually artifact. It's really due to diagnostic substitution. The reality is these kids with autism were diagnosed with what was called neurocognitive impairment, or basically retardation, back in the 50s and 60s. And it was really in the late 70s, early 80s that the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the psychiatry textbook, if you will, began to reclassify children that were considered retarded into a different nomenclature called autism. Autism really became a classified diagnosis in the DSM-3 I believe in the 70s, and that's when children who previously would have been called retarded were now called autistic. The term retarded is kind of an offensive term, and so that's part of the reason why the nomenclature was changed. And the New England Journal had a really fantastic article a couple of months ago that showed that really the rise in autism correlates with the change in the diagnostic criteria, and they're provided evidence that it's really due to diagnostic substitution, that there really is no epidemic of autism. That what we've done is we've just changed the diagnosis from one term to another. Let me make a silly analogy. Let's say that we took a disorder like diabetes mellitus, and we decided that was an offensive term, and we wanted to change the name of that disease to sweet urine disease, because that sounds better, I guess. I don't know. And you change the nomenclature, and all these people who were previously diagnosed as diabetes were now diagnosed as having sweet urine disease. And now you'd see an epidemic arise in the diagnosis and the number of patients with these. Oh my God, we have an epidemic of sweet urine disease. No, it was just diabetes mellitus. We just reclassified it. That's basically what happened. And that accounts for most of this epidemic of autism, is that it was really due to diagnostic substitution. So I took the New England Journal article and actually just did something really simple with ChatGPT, and I asked ChatGPT. I said, "What evidence is there that and can we look at what is the rate? What was the rate of diagnosis of neurocognitive impairment or retardation prior to DSM-3, and how did that change as the DSM-3 criteria were implemented and the name of the disease was changed? And there's a graph in my article below. If you click on, I think, the second one that I linked to, the second video I linked to, and there's a very lovely graph that basically shows that as the diagnosis of mental retardation went down, the diagnosis of autism went up. Almost entirely, the overall rate is identical. I think about 2.5% of children uh, were diagnosed with some sort of type of mental retardation back in the 50s and 60s, and the same 2.5% are now diagnosed with autism. It looks like, and in fact, the latest evidence in the New England Journal is that there really is no epidemic of autism. This whole thing is a mirage, and it's due to diagnostic substitution. Now, doesn't mean to I don't mean to diminish the pain that parents suffer with this. It's a very traumatic thing for parents. Some children with autism do just fine. Elon Musk is on the spectrum, and he's doing pretty well. Last I heard, he's got a pretty fat checking account. But there are a lot of parents who are distressed over this. And one of the most evil things we could do is take these parents and blame them and say, it was what you took when you were pregnant that caused this. It was that vaccine that you gave your child that caused this, when there really isn't any evidence of that. Putting the blame on these parents and creating guilt that they had caused their child's problem is really an awful thing to do. And then, to make matters worse, you take these same parents who you've now guilt tripped heavily, and then you take them and say, well, there's a potential treatment here. If you just buy this snake oil and this remedy and this herb and this thing and that thing, we can make your children better. Leucovorin is the latest manipulation. Taking this population of people, these parents who really have been through a lot, and then taking advantage of them. And that's really what's going on here. There is an industry that does this. It is the I have found the latest cause of autism industry, and here's the latest treatment for it. It's really quackery and snake oil. The snake oil business that we saw, that existed 100 years ago and more. It's there today. It's just a little bit more sophisticated, and so I think what we really need is to do a little more research on this issue of diagnostic substitution and really try to get a better handle on. I did a little preliminary thing, and it was pretty striking, that suggests that the autism epidemic is really an artifact, that there is no epidemic of autism, that it's largely, if not entirely, due to diagnostic substitution. And if that is the case, we need to get that word out there so we can stop taking advantage of parents and blaming them for something they didn't do, and offering false hope for treatments that are not going to work.